policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
Hey, welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us on this Wednesday, April 17th, 2019 day. And as you know, we have to celebrate something. And so not only do we find ourselves in the middle of Wednesday of Holy Week, the day that we remember Mary anointing Jesus's feet, the fragrant aroma permeating every corner of that room, and Jesus acknowledging and thanking her for her significant sacrifice over the grumblings of the disciples. But it's also National Cheese Ball Day here in America as well. And so we have those two contrasts that have been put before us today. But we are so excited to celebrate not only Wednesday of Holy Week, but also National Cheese Ball Day. And to do that, we have got quite a few guests joining us today to be able to contribute to the roundtable, this Millennial Roundtable. And I'm joined by Monica Zuniga here. Monica, how are you?
I'm great.
Okay, so you got to tell me, how do I really pronounce it where I don't butcher it?
The Z actually is pronounced as an S. So
Zuniga.
That's right.
Okay.
You did it.
It's
easy.
Okay, so I'll blame my Tennessee roots. And so I was trying to tell some friends the other day about some time I was in Paris and how I saw all of these sites, and I quite literally just butchered every site that I went to because I wasn't pronouncing it right.
Yes.
And so not only is there the Tennessee accent to it, but there's also the reality that I took 3 years of Spanish instead of that.
Yes.
And so those are
hard.
two things that were working against me in that effort. But nevertheless, we are so grateful that you are here today.
I'm honored to be here.
And then we'll also be joined by David Fraga here shortly during the first hour. He'll be with us the entire time. And then also joining us over the phone during the second hour, we'll have Michael McAfee as well. And we'll be talking about quite a few issues today. One of the things that I think is on many individuals' minds right now is at Notre Dame, about how, one, we saw the devastating fire, and just what a sight, a contrast and a sight to see that it could survive the Nazi invasion during the 40s. It could survive Napoleon being emperor. It could survive the French Revolution. It could the anti-Christian fervor of the French Revolution. It could survive 800 years worth of circumstances and situations. But then in 2019, over Twitter and social media, we saw a fire just gut the building out. And so we'll be talking about the significance of that, one, and then two, reaction from it. And I think that'll be really interesting to talk about, especially with you, Monica, and then also when David joins us as well. We'll also be talking about the appeal of Mayor Pete, as they call him. Mayor Pete, the South Bend, Indiana mayor, Pete Buttigieg, is running for president. And not only is he running for president, but he's got quite a significant appeal. But I'll go ahead and tell our listeners, I'll tell you all right now, one of the things I am very discouraged by was some of the protests that happened earlier this morning at one of the rallies. And so how does the Christian what is a Christian way to be able to think about Mayor Pete's run, specifically as he is an openly homosexual, but also an individual that is running as openly homosexual, but also Episcopalian as well. And so we'll think about that for a little bit. But then we'll also be transitioning over and talking about specifically David Brooks, and he's got a great new column out that kind of touches on some of the themes of his book. So we'll be talking about that later on as well. So Monica, I've talked enough now, and so help our audience understand. So you are now officially with the Initiative.
I'm with Initiative Network.
Okay,
officially.
so tell us a little bit about Initiative, and then also tell us about your role with Initiative.
Yeah, so Initiative is unifying and catalyzing the most diverse young leaders to disrupt division and to normalize discipleship. So traditionally, we've done that in Dallas. I actually helped Grant launch Initiative back in 2013. I was in the corporate world and had the funds to help fund what he was doing. And I launched and helped for about a year, and then I ended up working full-time with several nonprofits, so stepping away from initiatives. So coming back now is totally full circle, and I am our director of operations in this role and super excited to just see what God does through it. So we'll be doing more than Dallas. We're going to be actually in Colorado in August with some great leaders, and then other cities across the U.S. as well.
That's phenomenal. And so tell us that, because I think you brought up a really great point, and there was a great turn of phrase that you had. You're wanting to disrupt, but then also to normalize as well. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So I think what we've seen in our generation, and you can definitely comment to this, is that we see leaders coming together out of crisis. And so with the Ebola virus, we saw that in Dallas. A lot of leaders come together in response to that through shootings in our city. Even at a national level, we see leaders come together, and a lot of them meet for the first time because of crisis. And the division that we normally would have in the Christian world, in the ministry of reconciliation, we're divided on Sundays in our churches. We're divided throughout the week in our different sectors, maybe our denominational beliefs and some theological things that we disagree upon. But ultimately, we unite over crisis. And so Grant really has a beautiful vision that the Lord's given him to say, let's unite in our early 20s and early 30s as a response to Christ and not a response to crisis, so that as crisis will continue to occur, it's inevitable in our lives and in just the world that we live in, we will have a stronger response than meeting for the first time in that as we grow in our levels of leadership and influence around the world.
When you think about some of those moments of crisis, or you think about instances, it seems as though we kind of have a template now that we always get outraged over. There's certain data points, there's certain things that we always get frustrated by, and there's always an immediate response from it, but also kind of a coming together after it. And so when you think about some of those crises, help us to understand, what are some of those examples that you think about? I think one, for example, is racial reconciliation. Whenever there's crime relative to one ethnicity, it typically tends to unite us. But it's always after the fact, and there hasn't been a substantive friendship that's been formed over that. Can you help us understand more of those?
Absolutely. I think even we're in Texas, and it's the prediction is over the next 20 years. There's going to be an influx of Latinos that are the dominant, majority living here. So a big part of our heart, I'm a Latina woman, Grant is half Mexican. How can we really even reach the most influential Latinos in Texas or across the U.S. and really build a relationship with them, ensure that they have the same morals and values that we possess and that are biblical and strong before we have to respond to that when the years go by and they're now being elected as officials running our state, right? And so how do we influence them and capture them now beforehand? So that's one thing that we're super passionate about that isn't as vocally talked about because it's not a hot topic as racial reconciliation right now, but it's something that's on the forefront that we are very aware of on how do we really influence those key people and get them in the right groups and crowds.
Yeah, I just finished a book by Ferguson. It's called Town Square. I can't remember the full name of it, but it talks about it compares and contrasts, or I guess delineates the hierarchies and networks. And what he argues is that those networks, those movements that haven't always been so clearly defined, have really been the influencers throughout the generations dating back to the printing press of the 16th century. And so it's been a fascinating book. And when I think about what literally the Initiative Network is doing, it's trying to be those, put together those influencers and also connect those influencers in order to enact change in our communities. But we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, one, we're going to share with you a pretty big announcement. And two, we're going to continue talking with Monica, and then we'll also have David come with us in studio, and we'll be talking a little bit about what's happening in Paris right now. But we've got to take a break, and we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Soon, every female track record in Connecticut will be held by a transgender male. Recently, 2 biological male students finished first and second in the 55-meter dash. Last year, the same 2 students finished first and second in the 100-meter state track championships. This is a picture of the future, not only in the state of Connecticut, but nationwide and even worldwide. A biological male allowed to compete against women in just about any sport usually has a distinct advantage. It's only a matter of time before one of these transgendered males breaks existing women's records. Although it may not be popular to say, there are significant biological differences between men and women. At puberty, males get a massive dose of the performance-enhancing hormone known as testosterone. That hormone, coupled with the genetics of male body size, enables them to grow bigger, stronger, and faster. They have more muscle mass, bigger hearts, and greater lung capacity. This obvious gap between male and female athletic performance is the reason we separate men and women, as well as boys and girls in sports. So you might expect in a sane world that coaches, athletic directors, and athletic associations would work to enforce the time-honored rules of competitive sports. But this is no longer a sane world. Women who are revered as professional athletes and Olympic athletes have expressed their concerns only to find that they have become targets from transgender advocates. It's amazing what a little targeted intimidation can do to silence most of the sports community. What is happening in states like Connecticut are merely a preview of what will eventually happen in your state and your community unless you speak up. Otherwise, more transgender males will show up on sports teams looking for a competitive advantage. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment, Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. Breakthrough, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have joined us today on this Wednesday, April 17th, 2019 day. Joined here in studio by Monica Zuniga.
You got it. You got it.
Oh, I'm 2 for 3 right now. You can draft me in baseball because I'm killing it right now. And then also joining us in studio, we've got David Fraga here. David, how are you, man?
Doing great, man. Go Stars, bro.
Oh, my goodness. Can you help me understand what happened 2 nights ago?
Well, here's the deal, though. The goalkeeper is really tired.
Okay,
and according to the Tennessean, so I pulled this up already, that we had 60 scoring chances.
Oh, really?
Last game.
Oh, wow.
And the guy said this. He said that little bit of luck pushed Nashville. He said y'all were lucky.
Fascinating.
He said y'all were lucky. So
that's fascinating. Okay, but let's look at the series score really quickly, and we don't have to count moral victories because I don't think they count those. So remind me again. The series is set at, I think, 2-1. Is it 2-1?
It's 2-1. But here's the deal. Tonight's the night.
Oh yeah,
right? Tonight. Goalkeeper's tired, man. He's not
tonight
gonna.
Is the night.
Tonight.
My goodness, tonight is the night. My Nashville Predators are going to put it up 3-1, and I'm going to chant, "Let's go Preds." I actually went to the game on Monday night, and I will say, I was slightly disappointed in some of the conduct. This isn't all Stars fans. Just slightly disappointed in the conduct of certain Stars fans that I was seated around. Overall, I've had great experiences with Stars fans, but then again, I know Predators fans, i.e. my brother, can be very crazy, and I would not want to be sitting beside my brother. And I was glad my brother was not seated beside me 2 days ago because it could have the tensions could have escalated, to say the very least. Oh, yeah. So, in all good spirit, though, let's hope, let's pray, let's fast, let's make sure the Preds win tonight as they take on the Dallas Stars at 7 o'clock, and in the midst of what potentially could be a hailstorm. But nevertheless, let's continue our show, shall we? So a little bit of news, just to remind you, some of the breaking news, I don't know, some news that we introduced yesterday or last week and want to continue to update you on, is that the Point of View Millennial Roundtable is moving to Tuesdays. That's right. We like to move it, as they say. And we're going to be moving to Tuesdays at the beginning of the month. And so starting in the month of May, the Millennial Roundtable will be taking place on Tuesdays instead of on Wednesdays. And so you can still find the same familiar faces, same corny jokes, same unfortunate face that you see on Facebook right now. You will see us on Tuesdays instead of Wednesdays. And so be sure to switch on over if you're a Millennial Roundtable fan. And if you're not, please move with us anyway, because we would greatly appreciate your attention and we are grateful for your support as well. And so let's transition over to some of the news, shall we? And so it seems like everyone is talking about what happened at the beautiful Notre Dame Cathedral on Monday, and it's just shocking. And so, but even out of the bleakness, we're starting to see glimmers of ray and light, and that's just the altruistic and generous spirit that's happening. And so we saw just flames engulf this beautiful cathedral, but now it's raised. I believe the recovery efforts. French President Macron announced earlier today that recovery efforts have topped over $1 billion thus far, and they have. He has set a pretty stringent timetable of wanting to restore the cathedral within 5 years. And so it's a pretty significant one-time table, but to the altruistic spirit. I mentioned it in the daily briefing this morning. One of the beautiful things that the French writer Alexis de Tocqueville, 1851, he writes Democracy in America. One of the things that he says that made America great was the generous spirit and the art of associations that we had. That it wasn't necessarily what the government did, it's what the people did outside of government is what made America so great. And what that French writer said almost 200 years ago is the same spirit with the Parisian twist that the people of France are doing right now. And so, Monica, I know that you have you were just there.
I was
correct?
just there 3 weeks ago.
Really?
Which is crazy. I had 2 days in Paris before going to Dubai for a trip with young leaders. And so I actually went to the cathedral and joined in on their Sunday Mass service. And so it was a really beautiful experience, and obviously it's beautiful. I don't know if y'all have been there, but it's beautiful inside and out, and it really was a holy moment. I didn't plan to actually join in on the Mass, but I was like, oh, it's about to start. I'll join in, and so it was really heartbreaking to see that on Monday, flipping through my phone and see that news. And what I was so surprised by is that during Mass, there were at least 200 plus people there, and most of them were locals that attended that. And so I think that just seeing that firsthand, knowing that's their place of worship that was affected and has been affected. And so just really feeling the heaviness of that for the city, but also, just as you said, being able to read about the in-kind gifts given to restore is just amazing as well.
David, have you been to Notre Dame before?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I've been a few times, and each time it's like, and it honestly reminds me of the Disney movie, you know. But it's really a magical kind of a place, you know. The atmosphere there, you see how a lot of people go there just to meet one another, and I think it's a great place of community, right?
Yeah.
But more than that, it's just such a part of them, you know. And it's over 800 years old. That's nuts.
Yeah,
it's as if like one of our monuments burned down. It's not even over like 200, 300 years old, right? It's nuts. So I can't imagine something that's been a part of their culture just kind of like, oh man, that hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts so much.
Yeah, there were, I think, upwards of, 4 million or 12 million visitors to the cathedral every year.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I'm always struck by is just it's a testament to something bigger than itself. We didn't just lose a building. Right? And so I shared this story in the daily briefing a couple of days back, and I'll share it with you all, and we'll probably share it again. I got a chance to study over in England a little while back, and I took a little jaunt over to Paris just to be able to take in all the trips.
Yeah.
I channeled my inner Dora the Explorer and was visiting everywhere. And then there came a point, though, that it was at the end of the day, and I had made some friends when I was traveling, and they said, why don't you come with us to watch this football match, soccer match? So I was like, of course, I'll go to this local establishment. I'll watch this communist kickball. It'll be great because I'm from America. And so we have this great night, and it's like 2:00 in the morning, and I realize I got to get back to my hotel. And I'm hailing a cab, and they're like, no. You have to see the City of Lights. You must walk back.
Wow.
And so I'm thinking to myself, one, I barely know how to get home where I'm home, much less in a new city. But I decided to walk anyway. And I was reluctant at first, and shortly thereafter, I was just overwhelmed by the beauty. The City of Lights, the way in which the lanterns would illuminate the streets, the lights lit up the bridges, the cathedrals, the way the shadows reflected. I mean, it's absolutely stunning.
It's breathtaking, yeah.
And then when I got to Notre Dame, it was just this surreal moment. And I just sat and paused there for a few minutes and was just reminded that this was more than just a building, right? It was this beautiful testament to multiple generations coming together to build something that would outlast themselves.
Yes, so good.
And I think one of the, I'm reminded of in the biblical narrative is that even David, and says in Psalm 27:4, he gazed upon the beauty of the Lord, he said. That's what he wanted. That one psalmist would go in Psalm 52. He said that God shines forth in perfect beauty at a Zion. And even the word beauty in the Greek there's a word for beauty. It literally comes from the word to call, because beauty never demands attention. It always compels it. And we didn't just lose a building.
Yeah.
We lost a signpost that was pointing to the New Jerusalem. And I think that was one of the things that was just, we lost that richness. And it's really hard for us to make sense of that, especially from a millennial perspective, because we're not just, these aren't just buildings that we're going into, right? There's an aesthetic appeal among millennials, correct, Monica?
Absolutely. I think it's so much deeper that, just as you said, knowing how long it took to build it, all of the detail that went into it, all of the artifacts housed within the cathedral as well. It's so much more than just a place. And I think that's what came to life for me when I was there and being able to worship with the people was, this is their home of worship. This is not just a place that they come visit as a tourist. And it almost was so disruptive and almost made me a little frustrated to see groups of tourists like walking by during mass as these people are trying to worship, taking pictures, videoing. And I was like, this is a sacred place for these people. This is their home of worship. And we are just in here taking photos, getting a selfie, like something to post online. But I purposely, even after it happened, I was looking through my phone to see if I had any photos, and I had like 2 photos. I just didn't take photos when I was there. I was like, I want to enjoy this moment and the richness of it. And I feel like our generation misses that with so many things. But there's an aspect of being there, just that you captured beautifully with your words, that allows you to appreciate it more and see the significance of it versus just, oh, this happened.
Yeah. Well, we've got to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking about Notre Dame and just some of the other aspects that we haven't got to. Monica touched on, there were some artifacts that have survived. There are some things that we are still yet to remain sure of right now, but we'll be talking through a little bit of this, and then we'll also show how even in the midst of darkness in the City of Lights, there's glimmers of hope that have sprung forth from it. But we have got to take a break. But if you'd like to share your comment or your story from Notre Dame, the number is 800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
Sound engineer's about to give me a hot mic. That would not be good. Hey, well, welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you've joined us. We're joined at the Millennial Roundtable by David Fraga and Monica Zuniga.
You got it.
Man, 3 for 4. The batting average is going up. Before you know it, the Rangers are going to be calling me up, and they're going to realize very shortly. My dad called me frozen pizza when I was in the batter's box as a little kid because I never swung and I always left you unsatisfied. But that was a whole nother story. That was character forming, shaping on me. But so grateful that you have decided to join us. We've been talking about Notre Dame a little bit and the value of beauty. And I would be really interested to hear from you all, just because I think one of the fascinating things is if we look at it from a cultural standpoint, there's been a whole line that we're in culture wars right now. It's an us versus them mentality. Very much there's what some would argue we're living in a post-Christian culture where the culture is trying to attack Christianity. But it's in moments like this that a church burning down is cause for us to pause, one, and then to come together, two, and to mourn something that's lost. And I just wonder, I just wonder about what's the value, what's the role of beauty in this 21st century post-Christian culture. Maybe I'm getting too ethereal right now, but I'm just captivated by it right now. It's something that's spinning around in my head, and I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on the role of beauty. Monica, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think beauty has been skewed, the definition of it.
Yeah.
Us growing up, without social media and internet, and then now having it, it's you've got, at least I do, I've got to put controls on my phone where I can't access certain apps until a certain time of the day so I can enjoy my morning slowly and not be infiltrated with things that will tell me what beauty is. The Bible says, what you see with your eyes eventually goes into your heart. And I think that our world is seeing such a skewed picture of beauty, not just in images online through women and defining beauty, but really through what are staple things like this cathedral, like some of the beautiful historical things that are even in our own country here in the U.S. There are things that we've overlooked. And the attention to detail that made beauty back then is lost. It's like we're a generation that wants to just get to the end point. Yeah. And you made the point in the last segment, generations work together to build this. If you have seen the cathedral, if you pull up pictures, you will quickly identify there is so much detail, so much attention to every square inch of that place that makes it breathtakingly beautiful. And I think that there's an aspect of that just completely lost, and maybe unappreciated, not lost, just not appreciated through our generation, through the rise of social media. But I can just see it on my phone. Yeah. I don't need to go in person.
There's a great book, and I can't pronounce the author's name. He is, but it's called Into the Swarm. And one of the things that he says is that in social media world that we lose intimacy because intimacy is always found in shadows. And so it's the catch of a glance. It's the eyes connecting in the midst of a crowded and busy world. And in social media, you don't have that intimacy because there are no shadows there. You literally can zoom in on every little thing. And so it's very ethereal, but I think it points to something too as well. And also I'm just cognizant. I think there's one, we lose that, but then two, I just think about the role of beauty, David, because beauty causes us to pause, right? It does. Inevitably causes us to pause, and it requires detail, it requires time, and I just don't see that. I don't see it as prevalent as what it was in a previous time. And so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, because I want to help us to understand examples. What are some of those American examples? Can you think of any American examples where there's a source of beauty that just causes us to pause? Because this is where I think we can all come into agreement on, is because you're seeing this from the left, from the right, from Christian, from non-Christian. There was a multitude of sources of pause that caused us to mourn together when we saw the burning cathedral.
Yeah.
Do we have any of those here in the U.S. today?
Absolutely. And I was actually what I was exactly thinking about, how a lot of times how tragedy or how certain things that are like, is this really even happening, that are quote unquote surreal, which was actually one of the most number one Googled words last year.
Okay. Really? Okay.
Yeah, it was. And so how that just brings unity, and how that creates just like an atmosphere. Okay, I don't care where you come from. I don't care like what you believe in. Let's just unite together, and we are focused towards a direction, towards a mission, right?
Yeah.
And that is to be better than what that just happened is. And a lot of times that is either through like, shootings, or whether that's even through like, for example, the storms that are happening right now. I think, was it Alto or something like that, that had like tornadoes and crazy storms or whatever. People are uniting together, and they're like, this is a mission that I can be a part of to help one another. And then there's so much beauty in that, because in those moments you pause and you evaluate a lot of times, like, okay, what needs to be done? And when you get to that point of what needs to be done, you understand and start seeing like there is a beauty of what I can offer and bring to the table.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's really good. Monica, are there any examples that you can think of that are just things that can unite us around beauty? I'm thinking about monuments is where naturally my mind is going towards right now. Can you think of any?
I think cities, I've been to Boston a few times. If you've never been to Boston and never seen the cobble streets or the architecture there,
oh my goodness,
I mean, you are missing out. It is phenomenal. I remember just so funny going to a few places knowing, oh, this restaurant has been around since our founding fathers, and eating in the same place. And I think that would cause pause for our country. It's an oyster restaurant. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's phenomenal food-wise, number one. But number two, it's old. It's been restored and kept, and it says, it's been around, I think, since 1862, if my photographic memory is serving me well right now. But being able to know so many people over time have ate here and sat in the same restaurant, I think that would really shake a city. As well as monuments like, Cubs Stadium or Red Sox Stadium, or even in New York, some of the statues. I mean, think about the World Towers. I mean, that really was a monument. And obviously it was, lives were taken, and it was a terrorist attack that shifted our city, but it caused pause in the U.S. to say, these are two pillars of what we viewed New York, almost more than, the Empire State Building or other monuments there. They were staples that were taken away. And so I think those cause pause. Any of us remember exactly where we were. I mean, I was young, but I remember being in my classroom and seeing my teacher crying that day, and us all pausing that day in that class to take a moment. And we weren't, allowed to pray, but there was a lot of prayer happening in that moment. And I think similarly, that's probably what it felt like for the Parisians to see their monument up in flames, not a terrorist attack, from what we know so far, but it's still the same weight and the same feeling of, wow, this is an important part of who we are, and it's being taken away.
I do think that it gives us an opportunity, one, to reconsider. I think there's and I don't want to demonize one strain of thought, but I do think it gives us time to reconsider this idea of what is the role of beauty specifically for the Christian and specifically for the church too, right?
That's good.
Just like I think there's a movement of let's just get wherever we can. Let's not give attention to detail. Let's just do it. We'll meet in a grocery store. So I think, and we just discount those as frivolous expenditures that people are making, and especially on this day of Holy Week, more than any other week. We don't want to turn into the disciples that grumble because Mary could have sold the perfume in order to give to the poor, right? Like on Holy Week of every week, we should be very cognizant of the fact that there are times that we can spend significant resources to create beautiful objects that can transcend stubborn hearts in order that the gospel message might be able to pierce through. And we'll end on this before we go to a break. Augustine has just always been one of my heroes, and I wish I could think like he thinks. But one of the things that he says is that beauty has a particular way of delighting the human mind. And he likens it to a front door and a back door. He says the front door, often logic comes through the front door, but beauty has the ability to unlock the back door. So that even when there's stubbornness in the front end through logical arguments that are offered up, beauty has a way to transcend that stubbornness and cause one to pause and to reconsider. And moving forward, I think it might be helpful for us to think through ways as we consider the tragedy in France, how we can think through ways to create beautiful things for a glorious God that shines forth in perfect beauty from Zion moving forward. But we've got to go to a break right now. But before we go to a break, just want to make you aware that we will be moving the Millennial Roundtable. Yes, that's right. Millennial Roundtable will be moving to Tuesdays beginning in May. And so we want to ask you and invite you to join us when we make that move to Tuesday, but also join us right after the break.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. 2 public appearances by senior members of the Trump administration show the administration's fundamental commitment to religious liberty. And it's more than just words. In answer to a question from a reporter, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo pointed out the administration's foreign policy when it comes to religious freedom. He said, because it's at the heart of all the freedoms that every individual should have, right? Former Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker spoke at length about the importance of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act at a Heritage Foundation on Religious Freedom Day. He explained, RFRA promotes authentic tolerance because RFRA makes a solemn promise to the people of this nation that we can find a place for them, regardless of who they are and regardless of their beliefs. Both of these agencies have backed those words up with action. The Trump State Department hosted a Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom in 2018, and plans are underway for another in 2019. The Department of Justice has issued guidance on religious liberty to all executive agencies, launched its Place to Worship initiative that protects houses of worship, and been active in litigating violations of religious liberty. Whether it involves matters of foreign policy or domestic relations, it is good to see an executive branch committed to defending religious liberty in both word and deed. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, that cannot see right now because I do not have my glasses on. I had to take my glasses off, ladies and gentlemen, because there are some individuals in the office that decided to put up Let's Go Stars, wear green, be loud. And I would say the third proposition of being loud sounds very appealing right now, simply because it is time for the Fang Fingers. Let's go, Preds. Hashtag stand with us. Shall we do this? Nevertheless, no. We're so grateful that you have joined us today on this day that we will be celebrating here shortly, probably around 10 plus hours into the Preds' victory to take us up in the series 3-1. But we'll also be celebrating the fact that it is Palm, that we are in the midst of Holy Week right now. We've been talking about Notre Dame specifically and thinking through just, one, the significance of it, two, just the loss of it, but also some of the goodness that's come from it. And I want to shift over to that. And so we kind of went ethereal in the last segment, and I want to move over to some of the goodness that's come from it. I think one of the things that we see that even in the midst of tragedy, I'm just cognizant of, is the reality that our good God can bring out goodness from kind of the darkness. And I hate the fact that it happened, but I am so encouraged by the results of what's come from it. The idea that private donation dollars have topped over $1 billion thus far. 2 days, just 2 days.
It's amazing.
It's just a beautiful thing. And so I would be interested. Like, are there other aspects? Are there things that you all have seen that have just encouraged you in the aftermath? Have there been conversations that you've had? Have there been news items that you've seen that have been so encouraging towards you all?
Yeah, I would say for me, just super encouraged to know that because they were doing renovations, some of the statues were actually taken down and preserved. And so I, seeing that and reading that, I was like, yes, like that's so good. Like God goes before us even before we know what's going to happen. And I felt, as like corny as it sounds, I really did feel that with those statues, and just thinking about what else was preserved, what else was taken out for the renovations that were already in place. And then just, you know, obviously seeing the people come together. I mean, Paris has gone through a lot as a city. I feel for them. Just when I was there was a lot of stabbings going on and a lot of crime. And so just to see the city unite as well, and to see the images of that, to read articles about that, those things aren't going to happen when you're responding to crisis. You know, I think that you're going to unite, and you're going to really look at the big picture together. And so I think seeing that's been beautiful, knowing that some of the stained glass windows and a lot of the work that was intricate has been saved. The gold cross, you know, I know we've seen that image and it's still standing. Just these glimmers of hope of like, okay, and they were just able to save the structure, which is huge at the end of the day. So I think those things have given me a lot of encouragement. And obviously the dollars given, it's so
easy,
crazy, you know?
And within hours, that's crazy to think about. But yeah, I think one of the coolest parts about kind of looking through some articles and things like that is that they highlighted how much the structure has been through, like the French Revolution, the World Wars, all that stuff, and how this is like something, hey, we're going through this together, but we're going to make it through. Yeah. And so it's like that glimmer of hope, you know, in the midst of the ashes, quite literally. So it's crazy.
There was a video. I wish we could show the video. I'll link to it somewhere on the Facebook page. One of the things that I was so encouraged by is that on the night after, when the embers, I guess, were still burning, really, they were singing Ave Maria. So there were people actually outside the church that were singing Ave Maria while the church was still warm from the flames. And I thought that was a powerful testament, one, to the strength of the body, and two, to the reality that though you can I guess, to take probably a verse out of context, you can kill the body, but you can't kill the spirit, right? The reality that just the testament to the human capacity as well. And so I think one of the things taking from this is, one, the significance of beauty, two, the idea of goodness coming from even darkness, but just the reality of what's happening in France right now from a holistic standpoint. Around 34% of the French population is not Christian in nature. There's a significant portion of that 34% that is atheist, another portion that is Muslim, and then Buddhist as well. There's a pretty sizable contingent of Buddhists. And I wonder about what are some of the effects that this will have on the culture over there, just because the tension had been escalating significantly. I don't know if you all had read any of that beforehand. There had been a lot of vandalism that had been done, and vandalism that had been done on churches as well as synagogues as well. So one can only hope that this will hopefully cool some of the tensions that are happening in France right now.
It's good. I totally agree, and I felt that tension when I was there. So I'm hopeful that will ease a lot of that.
Yeah, it goes back to just that. There's just I think it's part of the French spirit to a certain degree, right? There's that rebellious nature in the French spirit, hence the reason why you saw it with Napoleon, hence the reason why, you've always, with the French Revolution, with Robespierre, there's always just been that rebellious spirit that's a part of France, just the Viva la France, right?
Yeah.
And so hopefully that can be channeled in a more profitable manner, and hopefully towards the good as well. And so I want to switch gears, I guess they would say, and I want to transition over to what we were talking about with the David Brooks article. And so David Brooks is coming out with a new book, and I'm super encouraged by it. We'll be linking to it and hopefully trying to get an interview with him when that book comes out. And it's talking about this. It's called The Second Mountain. And what Brooks is presupposing is that we go through the first mountain of our life, which is all about our significance. And it's about kind of trying to build a name for ourselves, and then we make our way to a second mountain, which is it's less about ourselves and more about others as well. And just before we go to a break, I think it would be important for us just to see how Brooks, whenever I read Brooks, it seems as though he's just grasping. He's a prophet that is grasping. And what the biblical narrative would say is that Jesus is just right there. I don't know if you picked up on that when you're reading the article that we have highlighted on the website.
Yeah, he's got a way of words, just articulating things so beautifully that's like, yes, I've always thought that, but I just didn't know how to say it. And a way to do it in love. But it is that kind of prophetic voice of like, hey, listen, like this is important.
Yeah.
Calling us back to the main thing.
Yeah.
But keeping it so relevant with our culture today.
Yeah.
So
I think one of the things that he talks about, and maybe David, you can speak to this temptation. He talked about the temptation to just be a workaholic, right? And so he said there came a point in his life where he realized where the place where the utensils had to be, he had Post-it notes, into the place where he should have been having pictures of his friends. He had to-do lists there, and so there was just the natural appeal towards significance through work. And he realized that there came a point that significance isn't measured by your workload, but rather by the friendships and relationships that you've been able to build. And that's pretty prevalent among a millennial population, correct?
Absolutely. And you always hear that same generic advice. If you want to get anywhere in life, you work hard.
Yeah.
You just work hard and you just keep going at it.
Oh, yeah.
And the bad thing about that is that we end up at a point where it's like, what am I even doing this for?
Yeah,
a lot of times. And so I loved his article. I actually was talking to a friend about it last night, and I was like, it's almost like he is hinting on so many like Christian, theological stuff, and he's just almost there kind of deal. But obviously he's writing for the New York Times.
When you were talking about when you're talking to your friends about the article we sent last night, is there one point that stuck out to you in particular? I'd be really interested to know, just because I felt like, he's making so many good points, but I'd be really interested if there was one point in particular that stuck out to you.
Yeah, I would say life is an individual journey.
Yeah.
So I thought that one was pretty like, okay, what do you mean by that? So I started digging a little bit more into that from his previous articles too.
Yeah.
So that one, and obviously you have to find your own truth.
Yeah.
Those are two that are really, I feel like people always want to say, hey, we'll just figure it out kind of deal.
Yeah, so good. But we got to go to a break. And so when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking about David Brooks and his new article. We'll touch a little bit more on Notre Dame, but we've got to say goodbye now because she is busy. So, Monica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
So grateful that you decided to join us today. And so we have got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, more David Brooks as well as what's happening out of Paris. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, April 17th, 2019 day. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us today on this Wednesday of Holy Week, and also National Cheese Ball Day is what we're officially celebrating it, apparently, here in the U.S. as well. We're so grateful that you're here. I'm joined in studio here in the second hour by, we got David Fraga here that's joining me in studio, and we've also got Michael McAfee over on the phone. Michael, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Nick?
You know, I can't complain, especially since my Nashville Predators are up 2-1 right now.
Oh man,
2-1. Are you a hockey fan, Michael?
I'm not.
I know you're a basketball guy. I didn't know if you were a hockey guy at all. Well,
no, I'd love to be discipled in it, though.
Yeah.
So you can help me.
Well, I would love to show you how to properly do the fang fingers in Nashville parlance.
You know, I think he's a Stars fan. Last time we talked.
Oh no,
like, he enjoyed talking about that. So.
I doubt that. He seems like a redeemed fellow myself.
Oh man.
But nevertheless, so grateful that Michael's joining us over the phone. We've got David in studio. We've been talking about during the first hour the significance of what's happening over in Paris right now, specifically with the tragedy that befell the cathedral that many of us have been to and have been in awe of Notre Dame. And so on Monday, the cathedral was just in flames on accident. We're still trying to figure out why and what caused those flames. But what we do know is that the steeple, the spire, has been destroyed. The iconic two towers, as well as the rose windows, and then some various other artifacts inside of the church have been saved as well. And it really did just burn out the central part of the cathedral. But one of the beautiful things, I don't know if you all saw that picture afterwards, you still saw the cross and the altar still remaining and still untouched by the flames. I thought that was such a significant moment. Michael, have you been over there before?
I have, yeah, a couple of times. My wife and I have got the opportunity to spend some time in Notre Dame, and it's just breathtaking. I mean, it's obviously tragic. What a loss for society to have something that beautiful, and obviously to know that Christians throughout the ages have worshipped the King of Kings there, and that was my takeaway. Was when we were there, standing there, I joked with my wife. I was like, when Christ returns and the whole world is ours to reign and rule forever, I want to come back and worship here. I want to sing here with the choir to Jesus. And so, anyways, so theological issues aside, I mean, it's just really sad that that's happened, but obviously encouraged by the support and everything that's come afterwards, like you all mentioned last hour.
Yeah, David, I think one of the things that you saw, even in the midst of such great loss, you've seen so much goodness that's come of it. And I think one of the things that we pointed to and that we're going to be encouraged by is just the altruistic efforts that have been shown and have been demonstrated just within the past 48 hours after the flames. Upwards of $1 billion has already been given, and there's already been a stringent timeline of wanting to be able to rebuild this cathedral within 5 years. And so even in the midst of loss, we can still find some glimmers of goodness, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, it's such a beautiful thing when you see even, I was reading the article as well, how luxury business owners within hours were already just starting to make things happen, you know, make funds happen, donate all this money, you know, hundreds of millions of euros. That is crazy to think about, but that is amazing as well, because they see the value and the importance of just like having to rebuild and pour in resources to something that means so much. It's like a part of your body, like we were talking about, you know, it's a part of your body, and that's something so tragic that you can't even explain happens. It's like, man, I just want to do whatever it takes to fix it, you know?
Yeah. So Michael, help us. I'd be interested to hear your working theory. Why do you think this appeals to both Christian and non-Christian? I think it's kind of obvious to be able to see Christian, right? Just because we see that, I mean, this is a place where, like you said, it's a building. There's significance and weightiness there, but it's also a pretty significant build. What do you think the appeal is that transcends regardless of whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, it's obviously, I'm sure, different to each community. It depends on who you ask, but I do think that there's something of, you know, of this iconic building that has itself become a part of history. I mean, I don't know what the rates are, obviously, in terms of tourists, but you have I would assume, a very large percentage of tourists that are coming not because of any religious connection or affiliation to view Notre Dame, but they're going because of its historic, iconic central place in Paris, you know, and an iconic city, the same way that I'm sure when you have visitors to Rome that they go to see the Vatican, even if they wouldn't identify as Catholic, you know. I mean, I know I was excited just to see the Vatican and St. Peter's Basilica and everything, and for, again, not being Catholic personally, but even if just for the cultural heritage connection of this is an iconic, important building that has been a part of human history. And so I'm pleased and I guess in some ways not surprised, but just, I don't know, I guess encouraged that there is an outpouring of support both from the Christian and non-Christian community to understand that this structure has had clearly an important role in the religious history of humanity, but also it has extended beyond just a religious impact to be a societal, cultural landmark in Paris.
Yeah, so 12 million people every year would have come to visit the cathedral, and I was one of those 12 million a couple of years back, and I shared this story during the first hour. I'll share it again. I was studying overseas and decided that I would channel my inner Dora the Explorer and go see the cathedral. And I remember visiting all throughout the sites all day and just had this great time. And then eventually at the very end of the day, I made some new friends in Paris, and they asked if I would be willing, if I wanted to go watch a soccer match with them afterwards to end the night. And so I decided, why not? You're only in Paris once. And so I go watch this soccer match with them. And then after, it's early in the morning now, we'd finally seen the soccer match, had given our amateur commentary on it. And I'm about to call and hail a taxi. And they're like, no. You must walk. City of Lights. And so I was a little reluctant at first, but then afterwards, shortly thereafter, I was just overwhelmed. The way the lanterns would light up the streets, the way the lights would just hit the bridges and the cathedrals, I was just stunned by the beauty of it all. And then when I was walking back, I finally got to Notre Dame, and I was just in awe. And I paused, and I was just overwhelmed, and I felt like the psalmist in that moment. That he says in Psalm 27, one thing I've asked, and I shall seek to gaze at the beauty of the Lord all the days of my life. To know that building was a beautiful building that functioned as a signpost to the New Jerusalem was just an overwhelming moment. That even when you consider the word beauty, literally means to call, right? It's taken from the root word to call in the Greek. And it was beckoning me towards something. It was beckoning me towards, it wasn't just simply I wanted to admire the beauty. I wanted the beauty to be inside of me, because I think there was a transcendence that was a part of it. And was just overwhelmed by it in that moment. And so I grieve the loss of it, but I'm also excited about our coming King and his beautiful reign here on earth. But we'd love to hear from you. Do you have an experience? Do you have a story about Notre Dame? You can call in 800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Soon, every female track record in Connecticut will be held by a transgender male. Recently, 2 biological male students finished first and second in the 55-meter dash. Last year, the same 2 students finished first and second in the 100-meter state track championships. This is a picture of the future, not only in the state of Connecticut, but nationwide and even worldwide. A biological male allowed to compete against women in just about any sport usually has a distinct advantage. It's only a matter of time before one of these transgendered males breaks existing women's records. Although it may not be popular to say, there are significant biological differences between men and women. At puberty, males get a massive dose of the performance-enhancing hormone known as testosterone. That hormone, coupled with the genetics of male body size, enables them to grow bigger, stronger, and faster. They have more muscle mass, bigger hearts, and greater lung capacity. This obvious gap between male and female athletic performance is the reason we separate men and women, as well as boys and girls in sports. So you might expect in a sane world that coaches, athletic directors, and athletic associations would work to enforce the time-honored rules of competitive sports. But this is no longer a sane world. Women who are revered as professional athletes and Olympic athletes have expressed their concerns only to find that they have become targets from transgender advocates. It's amazing what a little targeted intimidation can do to silence most of the sports community. What is happening in states like Connecticut are merely a preview of what will eventually happen in your state and your community unless you speak up. Otherwise, more transgender males will show up on sports teams looking for a competitive advantage. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment, Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. Breakthrough, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source
and
for
welcome
truth.
back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have joined us. We've got Michael McAfee that's joining us over the phone today, and we've got David Fraga that is in studio. And we have been talking about Notre Dame here over the first stretch and the significance of that. One of the things that we can be encouraged by is the reality that there's some goodness that's coming even in the midst of the darkness in the City of Lights. We've seen that over $1 billion has already been pledged for the restoration efforts. We continue to learn more and more about some of the stories that have emerged out of this. They're going through a renovation, which some attribute as to the reason why that might have caused this. It could have been started as just a mere construction, but we're not quite sure. But because they were undergoing the renovation, they removed certain artifacts as well. And so that's another reason to celebrate, is that we didn't completely lose everything that was in the building as well. But we've been kind of sharing some of our stories that we've had relative to Notre Dame. And so we've been opening up the phone calls to you all. I had a pretty neat little moment, as I shared in the previous segment, a couple of years back while I was studying overseas and decided to take a little jaunt over to Paris. But we'd love to hear from you. So you can call in 800-351-1212. Do you have a little story that you can share about Paris, or perhaps just an insight you'd like to share about the burning of the cathedral? And so you can do that at 800-351-1212. Or you can go over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And so we've got Lori in North Carolina right now. Lori, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Lori, what's your point of view?
Well, it's probably going to go against the grain of everybody else, but
you know, Lori, there's a guy named Montaigne. He said, "There's nothing more boring than a conversation in which everybody agrees." So,
okay, well then I'm okay then. My thought was when was burnt, and I haven't been there. I've been to Israel and saw a lot of landmarks and things there. Was that, it recurs to me that France, and maybe Paris is in particular, they have left their Christian roots. The Christian churches are dying out. Islam is taken over. And I know that this is an iconic historic building, but, I can't help but wonder, what does God think? I mean, is this building, taking the place of him? Is it, it's such, we're mourning a building. I really don't think it pleases him one way or another. People spending all this money. I mean, that's great. Looks good. PR, whatever. But I hope it's not just a stench in his nostrils about how we just worship almost a building, and they forgot him. They're not interested in God over there anymore, So that's my point of view, and I hope, they can rebuild it. But I'll tell you the truth, I don't think God is interested one way or another because, they have left him a long time ago.
Wow. Okay.
They probably used that building in the beginning to worship him, and it was sincere, and it was like incense up to him. But now, with all that's going on and they disregard him, it's more like a stench.
Well, thank you so much, Lori. You do bring up a great point relative to kind of just the history of the cathedral. There was a point, I believe, in the 13th and 14th century, or might have been a little bit later, where it was transitioned away from being a Catholic cathedral into being a cult of reason. But then it was changed quickly thereafter as well. And so it has. And Lori kind of brings up a viewpoint within Christian circles that it just wrestles with the tension of kind of the buildings, the ornate buildings and the intricate stained glass windows and icons, and then the desire simply just to worship God, which is to say, can you worship God through those buildings as well? It's been something that's been very prevalent and part of this conversation that's been had. But I'm Lori, I would probably, if you're still listening right now, I'd probably disagree with you simply because I think there's a way in which to see the beauty of God and see those beautiful ornaments and buildings and to be spurred on to love God all the more because he's given gifts to individuals. I'm thinking about the two individuals that built the temple in Exodus 32 to be given the gifts to build those things and create those beautiful things in order to stir their heart's affection for worship. Michael, what are your thoughts on this? Do you disagree with me, agreeing with Lori? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I would have the same. Lori's concern I resonate with, and this is a very especially, Protestant concern that we don't create idols of buildings or, architecture, traditional things, and we want to say, our churches, our Protestant churches in America especially, are very efficient, right? They just are Kmarts that we've transitioned into a building because we say the building doesn't matter. Yeah. Well, at the same time, I see in our own hearts and lives, you change out the chairs or pews or whatever in a building, even at a Protestant church, and you find out real quickly people are attached to them, right? So they do matter. That was the seat that I accepted Christ in, or that, I was baptized in that baptistry. And so there's not been a church gone through a building campaign that hasn't realized that it matters, that there's a connection with us to something, because it reminds us of how God moved in our lives at a certain point. And so I agree that buildings are not ultimate. And in terms of France, I'm sure that there are many in France that don't look at it, that either worship it as just admire it as a building and don't look at it as a means of worshiping God. But I've had one of my good friends was a missionary in France for years, and so in Paris, and I know that there are Christians, there are believers there in France, and although they may not have their worship services there, to have a church that was, constructed like that in the very center of the city, as a means of, at the time, to be sort of the idea that anyone from around the city could come and worship at this place. I guarantee you, he and other missionaries in that area are able to have conversations this week about the importance and significance of that building. And so I don't think that it's ultimate, but I do think it matters, and I think it's okay for us to recognize that buildings and architecture matter the same way that institutions and other things matter in pointing us to God and worship of God, even though they're not ultimate.
Yeah. So Augustine has this line that he talks about how beauty has the way of particularly delighting our mind. And so he likens it to a front door and a back door. And so when the front door of the mind is closed due to stubbornness, and so the reason and utilization of facts, beauty has a way of transcending and going and unlocking the back door of our minds to allow us to be able to see some particular truth. And so I think that's why I'm a little bit hesitant. I understand Lori's kind of just her warning of worshiping that building, and I think that's a fair warning to be able to offer up. But I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater to live in some distilled kind of monochromatic, no detail place where we can acknowledge that even our God shines forth in perfect beauty, is what it says in Psalm 50 verse 2. And then David gazed upon the beauty of the Lord all the day. That's what he desired. So I don't want to just throw that out, but I understand where Lori's coming from. And in a shocking twist, there's a couple of you that have point of views and opinions. And so let's start making our way through some of these phone calls. We got Sylvia that's in Illinois right now. Sylvia, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Sylvia, what's your point of view?
I thought that, the God-given talents that were used to give glory to God in the building of the Notre Dame Cathedral, it's an important fact. And, of course, I'm not here to tell anybody that God was speaking in a certain way, nor do I think Lori did either. But certainly, this is the country that brought us Victor Hugo's great statements in Les Miserables, and the theophany of Jesus in the burning bush called Moses. And I really have to think that not just France and certainly all of Europe has been so pluralized and definitely lost the seat of Christendom, as we could say, is in danger of happening here in the United States. But certainly that burning of something that was long held to symbolize reverence and beauty of worship could call all of us back to Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And much more to think about maybe that than all of the other hype that goes with it, that we are being called back to him, and prayers in that way for strengthening of the faith of people in Europe. I don't know, maybe you could tell me more about seeing a burning crucifix in the flames and what that meant to several people who were given the mic for a brief moment.
Joanne actually in Texas, it actually says that she was going to speak to that. So we're going to have to take a break. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for your phone call. But when we come back, we're going to continue talking about what's happening in Paris right now. And we'll continue trying to think through what is the significance of beauty in a post-Christian culture to be able to reach this culture. And so we'll be back right after this.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you are joining us today. We have got Michael McAfee that is joining us over the phone. And then we've also got David Fraga that's here in studio. We have been talking about what's happened in Paris, specifically the tragedy that was the fire that engulfed the spire as well as various other parts of Notre Dame. And then we have been talking about some of the ramifications from it. And specifically, there's two instances that I think we can illuminate at this particular point. One, we see goodness from it, just epitomizing what God would say in Romans 8:28, that he's using he can work together all of these things. And so even in the midst of this tragedy in the City of Lights, we're seeing goodness. And specifically, one of the ways that we're seeing that is through the altruistic efforts of upwards of $1 billion that has already been pledged to this. We're seeing it in instances where there's in a city that's increasingly becoming more secular and antagonistic towards the faith, upwards of 34% of the population does not believe in Jesus. What we continue to see, though, is that there's just this one of the things that I was so captivated by was this group that was singing Ave Maria right outside of the church on Monday night as well. And so we're seeing the goodness that's coming out of it, but we're also seeing what is the role of beauty today in this post-Christian culture. This cathedral, without a doubt, was very much a beautiful structure that stood the test of time for over 800 years. That took over 100 years, depending on your calculations of when it actually opened, over 100 years to be able to build. Multiple generations put their blood, sweat, tears, and treasures into this place to create something that would last past them. They planted trees that they would not sit under. And so what is the role of beauty today in 2019? And so we've been taking some of your phone calls right now. And so we're going to go to Texas. We've got Joanna that's on the line. Joanna, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Miss Joanna, what is your point of view?
Yes. When I first heard about the cathedral and that it had been destroyed and whatnot, and then I heard that the cross and the altar were still there, I thought that, that's just a beautiful way of showing us that even when what man builds that is beautiful is destroyed, that God still provides the cross, and we still have access to the cross and the altar, and that's the most important thing. That's just a picture for us to realize that.
Wasn't that a captivating picture, Joanna? My goodness, that was the picture that Joanna was talking about. I mean, it is there's blackness encompasses the majority of the picture, but then shining forth out of the, I guess, now opening that was made because of the roof burning, you saw this beam of light that was shedding down on the altar, and the cross was still erect in this rubble, and it was just an absolutely stunning picture. And Michael, that points back to the fact that yes, it was a weighty building that just, if those walls could talk, they would sing. There was so much history that was done in that place, but yet you can't squelch the spirit of Christ, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, it's amazing that, like you mentioned, so much of what could have been destroyed was saved because of the construction that had been going on and some of the things. It's quite a sight, that image that if you haven't seen, you need to see online of the cross standing amidst the rubble. And really that's what this entire Holy Week is about, right? Is what a picture for Holy Week of 2019, that the cross stands, over our mess of our life because what Christ has done for us. And so, again, I think this is a great opportunity as Christians to spark conversation. And so view this as a gift. You mentioned Romans 8:28, that part of all things working together for the good. Is what an opportunity, what an easy launching point we have to talking about the meaning of Christianity, the meaning of the cross with people this week, and inviting people to join us for Easter Sunday worship to celebrate the resurrection and why we do worship in places like churches. And so, there's good that can rise from the ashes.
That is the truth. And so let's keep on taking some phone calls. We've got Sherry in North Carolina right now. Sherry, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Sherry, what's your point of view?
Well, I've been listening to what you said, and I'm glad I was pretty close to thinking it might have taken 100 years to build it. I'm a former, present day art teacher as well, and so I've been doing art for many years, and I'm a Christian and been a Christian for many years. Sometimes you think about the world as being in chaos and everything, but when you go into a sanctuary like that, you realize there's so much beauty inside and outside. And being an artist, I was in school and they told us about the flying buttresses, which were amazing in order to build a big cathedral like that, to hold the walls up. And this was significant because people would take pilgrimages to these cathedrals, and this one in for sure, you know. And it's called the Point of Paris, right out front. I actually stood on the disc where you can say you're at the 0 point of Paris. And so it has brought people in for centuries. And I got to see sculpture by Michelangelo in there, and the rose stained glass windows, and I went into the room where the crown was stored. And so all these things are symbolic. But the whole thing is that we have a world throughout that has changed so much. But this is just a wonderful place to be able to go into if you want to see something where people put their heart and soul into it. And they were trying to show something magnificent, because I believe Christ is magnificent. And I believe today, for me to be able to be on the radio, when I was looking at the time, it was 222, and 222 has symbolized so much for me through my life. If I'm trying to find an address, sometimes it's amazing. It's like that number on some wall or building, it's got 222. It started when I was signing papers for my son to go to college, and it was Hampton College in Virginia, and it was 222 years old. It was started by Patrick Henry.
Oh yeah,
and,
I know Patrick Henry. You know, I think that's.
Yeah.
I think that you just have, Sherry. I'm so grateful for you and just for those comments, because you had eyes to see, and when you have eyes to see, you can see the beauty that's stored. Abraham Kuyper, who's a kind of a 19th century statesman, Politico, newspaper editor. He was a man of many talents. One of the things that he points to is he says that the reality is that here on heaven there's gems and diadems that point to the New Jerusalem, and there's kind of alluding to the fact that beauty has a way of transcending this current moment and pointing us towards the eternal. And I mean, Michael, you can speak to this, right? Like there was great efforts that went in the Museum of the Bible to make sure that it was beautifully done, and that two, it could point to something greater. And so I think, especially when I was up there, I mean, it's actually absolutely beautiful structure, because you recognize that you've got to, not necessarily in the negative sense, but you've got to assault the senses in such a way that individuals that aren't as logical in nature can still see the appeals of the truth in nature, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, again, I think that when, you know, you talking about Museum of the Bible, when the design efforts were being done and when the fundraising was happening, the view was, we want this to be a museum that's going to stand here for hundreds of years, you know, if the Lord tarries and everything. And so in the same way that, you know, these other major monuments in D.C., you know, have been around for decades and decades, and many of them over 100 years. And so when you have that type of long-term mindset, you want to invest what it takes to create a structure that does awaken the imagination to what this God must be like, that would create his book for us. I mean, we were looking at the Bible specifically, but in such a way that even in the house that we have this Museum of the Bible, that it would awaken the imagination and just the awe of who God is. And so it was with that same mindset, I'm certain that the architects of Notre Dame and other, you know, cathedrals that have lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years had the same or similar mindset of putting in a structure that would be, in a sense, timeless. And so, yeah, it's amazing how the Lord saw it well to give us colors and to give us the materials to craft things on this earth that might point to him and be those shadows that you're talking about, that Kuyperian quote of the substance that is in heaven.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we have got to go to a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to continue taking some of your phone calls. I'd be really interested to know a couple of things if you want to call in. One, specifically, if you have an experience or you have a comment on Notre Dame, you can be sure to call in 800-351-1212. Or I would be interested to know, what is the role of beauty in this post-Christian culture? We're continuing to hear the reality that we're just living in a world in which there's your truth and there's my truth. Does beauty have an ability to convey truth in such a way that breaks through stubbornness? We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. 2 public appearances by senior members of the Trump administration show the administration's fundamental commitment to religious liberty. And it's more than just words. In answer to a question from a reporter, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo pointed out the administration's foreign policy when it comes to religious freedom. He said, because it's at the heart of all the freedoms that every individual should have, right? Former Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker spoke at length about the importance of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act at a Heritage Foundation on Religious Freedom Day. He explained, RFRA promotes authentic tolerance because RFRA makes a solemn promise to the people of this nation that we can find a place for them, regardless of who they are and regardless of their beliefs. Both of these agencies have backed those words up with action. The Trump State Department hosted a Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom in 2018, and plans are underway for another in 2019. The Department of Justice has issued guidance on religious liberty to all executive agencies, launched its Place to Worship initiative that protects houses of worship, and been active in litigating violations of religious liberty. Whether it involves matters of foreign policy or domestic relations, it is good to see an executive branch committed to defending religious liberty in both word and deed. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. Joined over the phone, we've got Michael McAfee that is joining us, as well as we've got David Fraga, and we have been talking about beauty specifically. And we brought up it was interesting, some of the comments that have come in thus far, kind of some reticence towards kind of some, I guess, icons, which was what we would say in the 12th century, but I guess some art and the beauty that's exhibited today. And so some people are a little bit hesitant towards us having the proclivity to worship that instead of worship God. And so we've been taking some of your phone calls, and we'll continue taking some of your phone calls as well. And so if you'd like to call in, offer up your thoughts on this idea, you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And let's go to Hugh in South Carolina right now. Hugh, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Hugh.
Thanks for taking my call. And I know that there's a lot of people waiting, so I'll try to make this as brief as possible. However, to say that I was privileged to visit Notre Dame as part of a college chapel choir tour in the late 60s, as well as visiting other cathedrals in Europe at that time. And I will say that I personally worshiped in those cathedrals because I worship God in nature, but in a place where there's such beauty and grandeur and awesome workmanship, which God Himself has ordained and initiated, then I can't help but just be in awe of that. And one of my composition papers in college was the architecture of the cathedrals. And it is just so fascinating. And one of the other ladies spoke about some of these features, but just to see how God has given man certain gifts and abilities to be creative and to create beauty and great monuments like that. And at the same time, we know, as has been expressed concern, that we should not divert our allegiance from God to the things that God has allowed us to create, a great beauty, but to remember that even God destroyed the beauty of His earth in the flood, and He's committed to destroying the beauty of it again for the new heaven and the new earth. And the point being is that, yes, anything, a cathedral or a career or a beautiful architecture, not architecture, but beautiful landscape, I said landscaping, all of that can be beauty, and I glory in a sense in the beauty, not because of the beauty in itself, but because it reminds me of the beauty and the character and nature of God. And I may be an odd duck, but I'm a man who loves flowers because of the beauty of the variety, the beauty of the color, the wonder of the fragrance. And it all speaks of the beauty and the wonder of God, and that can be in the creations that we have been able to establish, like Notre Dame. But there is the risk that any of us, in any context, can divert our worship and our allegiance from the God of all of this beauty and wonder to the things that He has allowed us to create, whether it's a beautifully landscaped garden or even God's created mountains or a cathedral. And so there's a balance here that we need to continually work to strive to appreciate beauty and to be thankful for it and for man's creativity that God has ordained, but at the same time allow that, as has been expressed by others, to point us to God. And the beautiful windows in the architecture of those cathedrals throughout Europe, many of which I was privileged to visit later in over almost 5 years of missionary ministry there, I'm still in awe of them and the beauty of them, and they always point me upward to God, even if the society and the culture around doesn't see it.
Yeah, Hugh, one, I got to tell you that my grandfather is a big green thumb himself, and so I'm a great disappointment to him, the fact that I did not pick up the green thumb or inherit it. So I've got to let you know that. And then two, I think you bring up a great point in that some of these beautiful creations that we see do reflect and go back toward the Creator. So I think about you saying that you've got the green thumb. Like I can't help but think back to what Matthew would, or Jesus would say in Matthew 6, right? Like, consider the lilies of the fields. Eventually it'll come out how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, right? Like, God is telling us He's crammed heaven into this earth, and He's pointing towards these things of nature and how beautiful they are in order to testify how good He is. And I think that just creates more of an emphasis. And so, Michael, you've got a book that's coming out, and you talk about kind of how to help millennials be able to engage the biblical narrative. And I think that's one of the ways that there's an opportunity, I would say, that for many of them, they're not having a regular appetite of the Word, but the beauty outside of the Word, that the beauty testifies towards the God of the Word, has a propensity to create to at least pique a hunger for individuals that don't have eyes to see or ears to hear the good news of Jesus, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, you mentioned that Augustine quote of beauty being able to kind of circumvent, to go past logic, and to kind of awaken the imagination, right? And this is the strategy of just the poetry, that when we read poetry, it can seem so difficult and what's going on, and it's because it's giving us these vivid images that sort of bypass our logic to awaken us to a new reality of seeing things. Because otherwise what ends up happening is we have our way of thinking, our way of understanding reality, and so anytime we get new information, we sort of look at our worldview and try and place that new bit of information from within that reality. And beauty has the opportunity to sort of just bypass that and have us kind of experience a new or a fresh perspective on things without threatening our reality, but has the power to shift our way of thinking. And so I think that the Christians today in a gray world, in a dull world where we typically, I mean, you even see often in the conversation around this, people want to swing to one side or another of saying, of overemphasizing the value of buildings and structures and the material world to say that this is a great tragedy because of the art itself, and other people want to say, no, the art doesn't matter at all, and it's only, we shouldn't even mourn, take time to pause to think about the loss, and to sort of hold both of those in perspective to say, yeah, the art is not ultimate, but it's also a way of glorifying God. I think is important because I think it allows us to have an on-ramp to help show that there is more than just the rational argument of Christianity or the text that we have, but that actually gives rise to a beautiful world that God has created for us to enjoy and to worship Him with.
And David, chime in here for a little bit, because I just think I don't want us to miss that we're not that. Yes, I know we're living in a tension in which we can't worship the creation, but worship the Creator. But beauty within creation and the beautiful things that we have create, with emphasis upon the millennial, has a propensity to do great work to move people along that spiritual spectrum so that they might consider the claims of Christ if they are not following after Christ. Am I making sense right now?
I think so. I think a lot to do with beauty is a big search for the millennial. Like, we're always looking for that exclusive thing, or we're trying to go on grand adventures and be like, look what I'm doing. This is so beautiful. You're missing out, kind of deal.
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point.
So I think that's a big part of that, first and foremost. But I think it has a lot to do with a link to purpose in our generation specifically.
Great point. Well, we have got to take a break. Man, that was a really good point. I'm thinking about right now social media and how we try to capture beauty on social media. I'm thinking about Morgan Harper Nichols. She has this great quote that if you pursue after beauty long enough, you become it. And it kind of channels Lewis, that Lewis says that I don't just want to look at the mountains. I want the mountains to peer into me as well. But we've got to go back, take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue the conversation relative to Notre Dame. But also, I'm really interested on kind of considering these 5 truth claims that David Brooks makes in his article. But we'll be back right after this.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, April 17, 2019 day. I'm your host, Nick. It's so grateful that you have decided to join us for this third hour of the Millennial Roundtable. But before I go ahead and get started any further, there's two pieces of information that I must tell you all. One, if you have made your way all the way and are joining us from the first hour all the way to the third hour, please be sure to call in so we can send you the appropriate participation trophy and endurance medal, more than anything, of having to endure through me for that period of time. But then the second thing we want to be able to share with you all, and I failed to do it in the last hour, is that we are going to be moving. That's right. Similar to, I believe it's Three's Company or All in the Family, moving on up. Is it All in the Family? Moving on up. And so we are moving on up in the weeks to Tuesday. Yes, that's right. The Millennial Roundtable will be making a transition over to Tuesdays. At the beginning of the month in May, we will start having the Millennial Roundtable on Tuesdays from 12 to 3 normal times as well, or whatever time that this is being syndicated into your local market. And so one of the beautiful things that will happen is we will still continue to give you the millennial perspective on the day's news, as well as just cultural understandings of what's happening, some of the shifting mores from a millennial perspective. But we will also, you'll also continue to hear the same corny jokes. I apologize. And so be sure to follow along with us. We are so grateful for your support thus far, and we will be making that move again at the beginning of the month. And so, again, thank you so much for your support. But we're going to get to the news. So during the first hour, we were talking a little bit about just the significance and the weightiness of what's happened in Paris and Notre Dame. And we were joined by Monica Zuniga during the first hour. And then during the second hour, we continued to talk about that, but we shifted the conversation more towards the significance of beauty. And what role beauty has to play in a post-Christian culture when so many people are living in a world that's post-truth, some would say, where there's an inability to be able to reason together with one another just because we don't share common facts as much anymore. What role does beauty play to be able to pierce through some of those dividing barriers that inhibit us from having that type of conversation? Had a pretty good conversation around that during the second hour. And now here during the third hour, we're going to talk a little bit more about that because we've been taking some phone calls, and I want to get to Nancy. But also we're going to be shifting. For the majority of time, David Brooks has wrote a fascinating column, as is often the case, and we'll be talking about some of those 5 propositions he puts forward in his new book, as well as is iterated in his column. But you can find that while you wait on the Point of View website. Go to pointofview.net, and there you can find in the show notes, you'll be able to see that article, and you can read that article before we have that conversation. Or you can just wait for the conversation. But if you'd like to not just simply listen to it, but watch it, the glutton for punishment that you are, that you want to watch this, you can go over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And on Facebook, you'll see my live picture, my video, my moving picture, as they would say. And and then you can also leave a comment or question there as well. And so you can leave a comment or question right underneath in that comment box as well. And so I want to take one last phone call on Notre Dame before we move on. And so we're going to jump over to Arizona right now. We've got Nancy in Arizona. Nancy, are you there?
I am.
Hey, Nancy, what is your point of view?
Well, I guess God asked us to come and worship him in the beauty of his holiness. And that involves, creation before us testifies. Everything that he has created testifies of his beauty and his holiness for us. But he also calls us to corporate worship. And most of that is not going to happen out in an open field or a grove of trees, but it's going to be in a structure that's been inspired, that we've created as man, as man has created to be a place of worship for him. And having been to the Notre Dame several times, it's beautiful, and I'm not Catholic. I'm a Christian. I don't ascribe to that system of worship, and so maybe some of the artwork or whatever in there doesn't speak to me at all, because I don't ascribe to that system, but there is so much that does. And at that time that it was created, it was the best that man could give to point another person to God. And so there are windows there, and there are statues and things that were created, and just literally the scope of the size of the Notre Dame inspired us to look up and to think about something beyond ourselves. And I also want to say, too, is like when I was there, you look up to hundreds of feet, and right now we as humans, with all of our technology, cannot recreate what was there with our technology. We wouldn't even have thought of creating it. And I know that like Chartres Cathedral and things like that, there are colors in those stained glass windows that that analyze chemically with our best equipment, and we can't create them. And the same with the structures with wood and things like that. Even the weight of the windows, we wouldn't be able to build them today. And so God must have inspired those people, and it's thousands of people over years, over centuries, that God inspired and gave wisdom to create something like that. And we can have a knee-jerk reaction to like, oh, well, I don't agree with that. We should just worship God and not think about it. But in any system, we can worship something more than God, but we should also look at the hearts of the people and the thought that went behind it, and why did God inspire somebody to create that, and then take our mind back up to him that way, but also appreciate how he's led his people over the centuries. And that was the best they had at the time, when most of the people were illiterate and couldn't read scriptures.
I think, Nancy, you bring up so many great points in some of your comments. I can't help but think of two in particular. One, the utilization of God-given gifts to be able to create something so beautiful. And then two, the unity and the synergy that created that, right? Like the idea that it took over 100 years. So it took over someone's lifetime, multiple generations, toiling towards something that they knew they wouldn't be able to enjoy, but creating something for the larger community that was going to exist after them. That's just the sacrificial efforts, one, but also the synergistic efforts, two. It's just compelling to me in a way that even the story itself, and not simply just the byproduct of the story being the cathedral, but just the story itself is so compelling and bears such a testimony towards just biblical themes that are so rich as well as so prevalent for today's world.
Right, and you think about the Tower of Babel, where God confused the language of people who were building an edifice trying to get to God on their own, and yet he transferred the blueprint to generation after generation. And that's amazing right there, that God was so interested in this happening that he was able to transfer something where written language wasn't so prevalent. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't. It had to be communicated orally from craftsman to craftsman. And I also have several stonemasons in my family, and to know the effort that went into that, and to think, like they didn't have computers to record it. They didn't have, they didn't have any of that. They were using ropes and pulleys and all of that. It's beyond me to think of just, I have sat there and just marveled at, God, who are you that you could do this? It's like you created this world, but then you care so much about us.
Thank you so much, Nancy. We greatly appreciate it. We've got to run to a break right now, but we have got to run to a break. And so when we get back from the break, we're going to switch topics over to David Brooks. We'll be back right this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Soon, every female track record in Connecticut will be held by a transgender male. Recently, 2 biological male students finished first and second in the 55-meter dash. Last year, the same 2 students finished first and second in the 100-meter state track championships. This is a picture of the future, not only in the state of Connecticut, but nationwide and even worldwide. A biological male allowed to compete against women in just about any sport usually has a distinct advantage. It's only a matter of time before one of these transgendered males breaks existing women's records. Although it may not be popular to say, there are significant biological differences between men and women. At puberty, males get a massive dose of the performance-enhancing hormone known as testosterone. That hormone, coupled with the genetics of male body size, enables them to grow bigger, stronger, and faster. They have more muscle mass, bigger hearts, and greater lung capacity. This obvious gap between male and female athletic performance is the reason we separate men and women, as well as boys and girls, in sports. So you might expect in a sane world that coaches, athletic directors, and athletic associations would work to enforce the time-honored rules of competitive sports. But this is no longer a sane world. Women who are revered as professional athletes and Olympic athletes have expressed their concerns only to find that they have become targets from transgender advocates. It's amazing what a little targeted intimidation can do to silence most of the sports community. What is happening in states like Connecticut are merely a preview of what will eventually happen in your state and your community unless you speak up. Otherwise, more transgender males will show up on sports teams looking for a competitive advantage. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment, Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. Breakthrough, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you joined us, and I'm glad I joined you all about 2 seconds late, apparently. And so, well, we have been talking about Notre Dame here for a little bit, but we're going to transition topics now. There's an interesting article that David Brooks penned about a week ago that I think is going to be pretty interesting to hear and argue with David, and then obviously open up to some of your comments as well. We will be, and it's over on our website. So I want to encourage you to get over on the website, www.pointofview.net. It's entitled 5 Lies Our Culture Tells, and explores some of the cultural roots of our political problems. It's coming out of another book that he is set to publish here shortly. It's called, or set to be released here shortly, called The Second Mountain. It becomes clear that things are not in good shape. Our problems are more societal in nature instead of political in nature. And so I thought we'd make our way through some of these ideas, the lies that our culture tells us, and then maybe we can have some conversation around some of these things as well. And so let's jump to the first one, shall we, David? So he says, the first being career success is fulfilling. And he says, quote, "This is the lie that we foist on the young in their tender years. We put the most privileged of them inside a college admissions process that puts achievement and status anxiety at the center of their lives. That begins advertising a lifelong mantra. If you make it, life will be good." And so it goes back to that, like the reality that some of us buy into of if my career can be good, my life can be good, but there's got to be more to life fulfillment than a good career, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the instant pressures that is easy to put on someone in order to give them purpose in a way, at least direction, because a lot of the times growing up, you're trying to figure out, what is it that I want to do? And from previous times that you and I have talked, we have talked about how a lot of that roots from like how our identity turns into that culture of like what we do instead of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so although this is like, hey, work hard, and yes, it's good because Colossians 3:23 talks about, and whatever you do, you know, do it as if you're working for the Lord, right? And I think it's amazing, but if your motive is like, I'm going to be fulfilled in doing this, then it's going to be a God-sized hole inside of you.
Yeah,
right?
contrary to Jerry Maguire, you do not fulfill me, right?
Yeah.
There's not a partner, nor is there a job that can fulfill you. I think, but here's where I'd push back on. And so one of the things that I think someone that might hear this could say is, well, you're just saying then that millennials simply just kind of, they just want to slouch off. They don't really want to do any work. They just want to kind of live and let live, right? But I don't think that's what we're saying. I think it's just a reality of my whole fulfillment can't be my job. Like I'll give my job, I'll do my work heartily, but I refuse to give my life to my work is what I think we're saying, right? It's like understanding that there's more to life than simply just the job, the 8 to 5 job. And I think we've missed that in the world today. Because I mean, you look at the numbers, and ever since 1979, there's been an uptick of almost 2% relative to number of hours individuals are working. Right. It's close to 10% of the workforce now is working over 60 hours a week. Like, there's the lie of fulfillment comes in career success has never, I don't want to say has never been, is very prevalent today that I think we need to be watchful of.
Absolutely. And I think because of that, it creates this anxiety from it. And if you're not, you know, being quote unquote fulfilled in what you're doing in a way, I guess you could see the pushback in this is that there's shame in that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And with that, it's like the exposure of it all, right?
I think, I think we can all, like, we can resonate. And I'm sure there's people that are listening right now that can resonate. Like the idea of, oh, you're leaving at that time where it's 5 o'clock has come around and you finished your work. They're shortly thereafter for the day and you're about to walk out, but you feel you're heightened by a sense of shame if you walk out and you're the first one to walk out because, well, aren't you supposed to be working harder? Or you walk in to work at 8 o'clock and people are already there and you're like, well, I missed out on an opportunity. Like there's this growing, gnawing sense of I want to prove my worth through my busyness that I think is very, it can be very detrimental. And I think David Brooks does a really good job of illuminating this, right?
Absolutely.
Can you think of instances, especially from a millennial standpoint, where there's other senses of people trying to shame you by saying I'm just working right now or something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, you can see that in sports all the time.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, for sure. More. Yeah, so in sports, you could see how, if you're not waking up there, getting 5-10 minutes early, getting an extra set or whatever it is, then you are not getting better. You know, you're not helping the team. You're just looking out for yourself. Or if you're not, for example, helping out an organization by going the extra mile, right? It's easy for that to be manipulated in a sense of, okay, you really don't care because your actions are showing that you're not going that extra mile. But in a way, it's like, but I've done my responsibilities. I've done my duties.
Yeah.
Why is it that I need to have that anxiety and pressure to do more?
Yeah.
So there's this constant battle in a way, especially for a lot of millennials who are trying to find purpose and fulfillment in what they do. Right.
And again, I don't want another generation to think that we're calling for people not to work hard. Like that's the last thing that we want to do. Like I work hard. Like I work hard, but then again, like I also recognize that there's life that exists outside of work. I think there was a great New Yorker article that illuminated this about 10 years ago, and it just frustrates me to no end because I can't find it anymore. And it's like this shift in thinking that's happened between the millennial and then between the boomer generation. The boomer generation, I wish I could find this. This was such a good article. It talked about how there was a boomer generation that worked and worked and worked, and they worked really hard until they got to retirement. And then when they retired, they took it really easy. And they wanted that retirement life. They moved away to Florida, et cetera, et cetera. And so what the shift in thinking, though, for the millennial is they don't want to wait to live until retirement. So they decided that they're working hard, but they're not working as hard as that boomer because they're willing to take time off within their appropriate time. They're willing to take time off. They're willing to say to say goodbye to the office at a particular time after they've done their due diligence, after they've completed their work. And they're living and they're just reconnecting back when the day starts for the next day or reconnecting over on the weekend. it's just this shift in thinking that's especially prevalent within millennials as well as Gen Z of I'm going to work, but I'm also going to live. Mm-hmm. And I think you see this worked out in a variety of different ways where there's just a premium value that's placed on relationships, not only within the workplace, but also outside the workplace as well. Do you see this as being the same among your friend group?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So you said premium value on relationships, right? Yeah. So I agree with that there's a lot of value on having those close few, right?
Yeah.
But the only thing is there's not enough of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times we tend to isolate ourselves in this perspective, as we were talking about, kind of like we were talking about previously with beauty, how that has changed our perspective, right? In the same way how our work and career has changed and to a perspective of getting attention and admiration of others, just like beauty has been, instead of capturing the moment of the awe and wonder of creation, per se, or the awe and wonder of like, this is what we are doing to glorify and build God's kingdom in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of roots to your why, your identity. It roots to a lot of different things here, right? So, and in terms of the next one, where it talks about happiness.
Right? Keep on. So the next one, it's a great segue. So the next lie that our culture tells us, David Brooks illuminates, is I can make myself happy. And this is the lie of self-sufficiency, Brooks states. He says, quote, "This is the lie that happiness is an individual accomplishment. If I can have just one more victory, lose 15 more pounds, or get better at meditation, then I'll be happy." People looking back on their lives from their deathbeds tell us that happiness is found among thick and loving relationships. Isn't that so? That's so true. Like, no man is an island, right? The reality that a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. There's great value when iron sharpens iron, right? A premium and significance placed upon relationships to the extent that it also makes us happy as well.
Yeah. So I associate this a lot with thirst. Like, we have this thirst and desire that we constantly want more and more, kind of like the 15 pounds, or if I achieve this goal, I'm going to make it. Finally, trying to get to that end point. But the reality of it, kind of like when Jesus talks about, the woman at the well, it's like, let me give you this living water, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have been with so many men that are not fulfilling you, right? Yeah. The happiness, everything that you've been doing is not making you happy.
And you bring up a great point on this, because it's not simply just the number of friendships that you have, it's the quality of the friendships that you have, which I think is the temptation that we can live in this Facebook world, regardless of your age, is that the more friends that I have, the more rich and happy that my life will be. When in reality, you could have a ton of friends and still feel completely isolated and lonely. It's this robust thickness that comes from relationships where you can sit silent with each other and it's still good. Right? Like,
that's good.
Henry Nouwen has that comment that he says is that the true friend isn't necessarily the person that offers the right word at the right time, but is always right there. Like, you can not have the pressure of having to say what you need to say in that moment because your presence speaks enough, which I think is pretty significant. We're going to have to take a break right now, but when we come back, we're going to continue making our way through Brooks's article, The 5 Lies That Our Culture Tells Us, but we've got to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
This Easter, from 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment comes Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. When Joy Smith's son John falls through an icy Missouri lake, all hope seems lost. But a mother's belief in the power of prayer inspires her community to trust God to do the impossible.
Please, God, send your Holy Spirit to save my son.
Breakthrough, rated PG, parental guidance suggested. Now playing. Tickets and showtimes available at breakthroughmovie.com.
Ronald Reagan.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
What are you doing to pass on truth and freedom? As one step, have you joined Point of View Radio's Truth Team? If not, why not? Join today. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I apologize. Sometimes I wish y'all could listen to what we say during the break. Other times I'm glad you can't. But nevertheless, we've been talking about Venmo to a certain degree, but then also this David Brooks article. And he was kind of illuminating the 5 lies our culture tells us. And so we've been making our way through some of those lies. And one of the first ones being that career success is fulfilling, understanding that career success is a good thing, but it's not a fulfilling thing, that there's more to life than simply just moving up the vocational ladder. It won't make you the robust happy that he alludes to. The second being that I can make myself happy. He calls this the lie of self-sufficiency, that happiness is an individual accomplishment. And what he's alluding to is the reality that friendships really have that propensity to create a wellspring of happiness within inside of us. And the third, and we'll move our way into this third one, David. And he says that life is an individual journey. And he says, quote, "This is the lie books like Dr. Seuss, Oh, the Places You'll Go, tell. In adulthood, each person goes on a personal trip and racks up a bunch of experiences, and whoever has the most experiences wins. This lie encourages people to believe freedom is the absence of restraint. Be unattached, stay on the move, keep your options open. In reality, the people who live best tie themselves down." He makes a point of building down those roots, not simply just having friends that know you, but really being a part of a community. Right. And I'm sure you can allude to this and relate with this, is the reality of like I want people in my community to know me, and I want to be known in my community as well, to work for the welfare of our community. Right? There's a biblical refrain in this, that we hear it.
Yeah, 100%. And also, just talking about a statistic that we talked about probably quite a few months ago, maybe, but it was talking about how millennials, by the time they're 30, have gone through 12 to 14 organizations or something like that, workplaces or whatever it is. But that being said, I like how he talks about how it's better to be rooted, and how we need to have more depth in our relationships, because too often, like when we have these shallow relationships, it becomes about us a lot of times, right? So like life is an individual journey. That's a lie that it really just speaks volumes in the sense of, what's your motive? What is it? What are you about? Kind of deal, and just where you're rooted.
So so Ben Sass does a lot of work on this, doesn't do a lot of work on this. He alludes to it in his book, and he identifies 3 particular types of people in communities right now. And he kind of calls upon some research, I believe, out of Florida State University. And he says there's 3 different types of people that we find ourselves surrounded by in today's culture. There's mobile people, there's rooted people, and there's stuck people. And so stuck people are those people in our communities that really find themselves, whether they're kind of without a job right now, and then they're faced with the proposition of whether they want to move to be able to find a job and leave family and their social safety net, or do they stay in this social net that they've developed, these robust relationships in their community, but still in a less than desirable job or no job whatsoever. So they're just stuck right now. They're a rock and a hard place right now.
I wonder how that parallels with fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah. So here's where it goes. So then there's another one that's the mobile person, and this is the person that this is by far the most prevalent among my friends, the individuals that are on planes all the time, that aren't here, that even on the weekends they decide that they're going to go see X, Y, and Z friends halfway across the country. And so they're here, they have a bed here, but they're everywhere else. Work is always taking them away. But then even if they aren't away, they decide that they're going to go, even if they don't have to be away, they decide to go away so they can go be with friends elsewhere. Yeah. So they're mobile. They have no sense of home here. And then third would be those individuals that are rooted. Those are the individuals that, work might take them places, and they might be, but work might take them places, yes, but they're known here. They're participating in civic organizations. They're involved in a nonprofit work. They're at a church by chance. They're volunteering somewhere in the community. Those are people that are working in their community, but also going above and beyond through civic engagement in the work, that are a part of the community. Ben Sass alludes to them as the individuals that are the gym rats, right? They're the people that are showing up at the high school to help out when there are things in need, or to cheer on the local high school football team. And what are your thoughts when you hear about those three different types of people? Does that resonate? Does that seem to relate?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like the fight, flight, or freeze, like I was mentioning earlier, but also it kind of resonates towards how that is a lot of times our environments help shape us in a way. And so if we're constantly on the move, can we be comfortable in that eventually, you know? And that's something like I could even ask you, like, do you get comfortable, like, do you feel comfort in traveling or being on the move a lot? You know?
Like, so for me, I'm one of those guys that's mobile. Like, I'm thinking about my schedule over the next 2 weeks. And it's so funny. It's so funny just because I come from family, and this might be to older generation, familiarity breeds contempt. So you're not going to really like this. I'm going to share a little bit more. Like, I just, travel was just not a significant part. Travel for work was not a significant part of my life growing up with the family that was around me. But that's just the world that I live in, and kind of what my job entails now. But I've gone above and beyond, though, David, just because I want to be rooted. Like, so I want to make sure that I'm see my city and love my city. And I think one of the ways that we love our cities is to become familiar with them, to be a part of them, and so that we can be a part of those, be one of the sheep, right? And I want to identify what are some of the opportunities instead of just problems plaguing our city. What are some of the opportunities? And I've become really involved in certain, like, I think about some of the great nonprofit work that's going on in our city. So I'm a part of the Hope Center, which is it's this commercial real estate campus. Really, it's this campus that hosts over 40 nonprofits in the area, 40 plus nonprofits in the area. And I'm like so captivated by that business plan of bringing together a variety of nonprofits that are all pursuing after Jesus and trying to work towards the benefit of those, to extend the kingdom, but then bring them all together under one roof so that synergistic efforts might spill out from that. I'm captivated by that, and I want to give a part of my life to helping that type of endeavor. I am so compelled by human trafficking, and I'm repulsed by it, and the idea that there are 319,000 people in Texas that are being trafficked. That just disgusts my stomach. And so I'm giving myself and giving my talents, if there are any, to human trafficking with Traffic 911. And the work that they're doing right now just compels my soul. It makes me want to expend the energy that I have to be able to help that organization in any way possible. I'm captivated by the power of prayer that happens in the workplace, knowing that people have less friends, but also are going to work. So the Dallas Prayer Breakfast, the Dallas Christian Business Leader Prayer Breakfast, I'm giving my efforts to. I don't want to be the guy to just go home and veg out on a TV. Yeah. Like, I want to be involved in my community. And so that's what I've gone great lengths to try to be one of those individuals that's rooted. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Yeah. So that's commend you for that, man. And I love how you say you want to make this place kind of like your home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why we're going to convert you to a Dallas Stars fan eventually.
Well, so I would assume that Dallas Stars fans want to have character. And so I wouldn't consider it a characteristic worthy of emulation if I was not loyal, right?
Okay,
and so
that's fair.
Like, there's a loyalty that was built into my coming from Tennessee. I was there when the Predators started in Nashville. I was actually at the first game. My greatest memories are receiving a free puck, one, and then two, getting a huge piece of chocolate cake at our seat. And so sweetness is the way to my heart, and they took it. They took it. So awesome. Okay. Considering the next one, because I want to get to this one. You have to find your own truth. And he says, quote, the privatization of meaning. It's not up to schools to teach a coherent set of moral values or a society. Everyone chooses his or her own values. Come up with your own answers to life's ultimate questions. You do you. The problem is that unless your name is Aristotle, you probably can't do it. Most of us wind up with a few vague moral feelings, but no moral clarity or sense of purpose. He goes back to, we're just in a world today where we don't have any value. Like, we don't have any values, right?
Right. And I like how he actually talks about how it's a group process, because a lot has to do with the previous point of, life as an individual journey, how being rooted in a community and community within a church, community within an organization, or whatever it is that's going to help grow you, mold you. And that is going to be a huge part of that quote unquote group process that's going to eventually, you're going to start forming these truths and forming these values, and they're going to be a part of you, right? We kind of been back and forth with Notre Dame, right? And I think one of the biggest things there was that was such a place of hope and a symbol of pointing towards a direction of something greater, right? So in the same way, finding your own truth, that is a big lie, because everyone says, hey, you'll figure it out eventually, you know? Or the advice of like, hey, just kind of form whatever you think, you know? Or man, that's what a lot of universities teach. A lot of public schools teach as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, okay. We got to go to a break. When we come back from the break, we're going to continue on this because I've got a couple of comments and we'll offer. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. 2 public appearances by senior members of the Trump administration show the administration's fundamental commitment to religious liberty, and it's more than just words. In answer to a question from a reporter, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo pointed out the administration's foreign policy when it comes to religious freedom. He said, because it's at the heart of all the freedoms that every individual should have, right? Former Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker spoke at length about the importance of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act at a Heritage Foundation on Religious Freedom Day. He explained, RFRA promotes authentic tolerance because RFRA makes a solemn promise to the people of this nation that we can find a place for them, regardless of who they are and regardless of their beliefs. Both of these agencies have backed those words up with action. The Trump State Department hosted a Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom in 2018, and plans are underway for another in 2019. The Department of Justice has issued guidance on religious liberty to all executive agencies, launched its Place to Worship initiative that protects houses of worship, and been active in litigating violations of religious liberty. Whether it involves matters of foreign policy or domestic relations, it is good to see an executive branch committed to defending religious liberty in both word and deed. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined here in studio by David Fraga, and we have been making our way through David Brooks's column, The 5 Lies Our Culture Tells. And if you want to find out more information on that article, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, or if you want to go over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, you can share, you can find that article over there. I'll actually post it right now over on our Facebook page as well. And we've been making our way through this list, David, and I'll start back at the top just because I think there's only 5 of them. So career success is fulfilling, the lie that the higher our title, the more fulfilled that we'll be, which in reality is just not the case. We know this from a Christian perspective too, that it says in Colossians 2:10 that Christ is the one that completes us. 2, I can make myself happy reality that happiness is not something that's self-sufficient. Happiness comes from a life in community, which leads itself into the third, that life is not an individual journey. There's a sense of not only having friends to come around you to make you happy, but also to be known in a larger community. And I can't help but think about Jeremiah 29:7, to contribute to the welfare of your city as well, the significance of that. And then the fourth is something that we were alluding to before we had to go to a break, is you have to find your own truth. And so the sense, which was kind of, I believe it was Bork that wrote the book, that we're slouching towards Gomorrah, right? We're losing our sense of morals and our sense of, there was even an article in Axios today that talked about the prevalence of cursing in not only in the political campaign, but also in the workplace as well. Right. More and more individuals are cursing, which, depending upon your perspective of Ephesians 4:32, is not necessarily, or 4:29 rather, is not conducive for the Christian, but only giving words that bring grace. But nevertheless, it's just boggling to my mind, because there are just certain things that I guess I know I was privileged and blessed to grow up in a household that kind of inculcated some of those characteristics, those values, those morals within inside of me. But I've also been blessed to be a part of campuses and communities that inculcate some of those values as well. And it seems as though there are more individuals today that believe that your sense of morality, those values are things that you kind of come to individually, and you kind of decide whether they're going to hold true for you or not, which is unfortunately just not the case and doesn't necessarily end well if you choose that route, right?
Right. And it's interesting how this lie, the fourth lie that we're talking about right now, you have to find your own truth, is something that can almost seem stressful, because then it could make someone reflect like, okay, I don't want to confront that, because that is going to take me down a road of like, what's the answer to life's greatest question? Why are we here, right? But a lot of this has to do with, that I think is amazing about this kind of confrontation of this lie, is like how people, Brooks talks about how people absorb a lot of values, by submitting. And I think we have a big issue of going into depth of that, and how our translation of that, what that means, especially since, we've been talking about relationships, we've been talking about community a lot, how that helps form us and mold us, right? But the reality is, even in our workplaces, even wherever we're at, we have an issue, or we don't tend to go so deep in relationships and conversations. Yeah. There's a fear of that almost. We love the shallow. We love to show only the good of us, right? Yeah. So...
yeah, it's a fascinating thing, because you don't want to be judged, right? And you don't want to give someone the opportunity to judge you, so you kind of stick in the shallow end. And contra, I guess, to Miley Cyrus, who says that only God can judge me, and the reality is, like, we're being formed and shaped by individuals, and it's just imperative upon us to offer up our judgments in such a way that's gracious, but also that's not simply just a critique, but that also offers up a solution as well. Well, what is it that Teddy Roosevelt says? He says then, never trust the critic. The critic is the chief coward, is what he says. If you're just simply going to identify the wrong and not necessarily put forward something that could be right, good, and imitable. Okay, so let's find our last one, and the last one being, rich and successful people are worth more than poor and less successful people. He says, the quote, "The message of meritocracy is that you are what you accomplish. The false promise of meritocracy is that you can earn your dignity by attaching yourself to prestigious brands. The emotion of meritocracy is conditional love, that if you perform well, people will love you. No wonder it's hard to be a young adult today. No wonder our society's fragmenting. We've taken the lies of hyper-individualism and we've made them into unspoken assumptions that govern how we live." It's that shocking. And you come upon this. I know the easy way to put this is just, if we look at the situation at the border right now, like they're not worthy of consideration simply because they're, one, don't have the necessary documents, or two, that they're different. But then I think there's another piece to be made in this, in that regardless of whatever you're precluded, like the image of God is not contingent upon papers. It's not contingent upon paper. It's not contingent upon how much you make or worth or how many people are clamoring for you. Like, the image of God requires us to show dignity and respect to any individual, and everyone bears that image of God, right?
Right. But you can also make the argument, Nick, that what value are they bringing to society?
Yeah.
Kind of like a lot of scripture gets taken out of context here. A lot of times of like, if you don't work, you don't eat.
Yeah.
You know, also just the community aspect of, you know, serving one another, serving your brother and your sister, right? But yeah, there could be a lot of attention here, obviously. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about that, man.
Yeah. I tease it out a little bit more. Give me, I'm trying to better understand what you want me to say.
So absolutely. So someone is trying to, per se, enter your organization, right?
Yeah.
So if they're trying to enter your organization, but they are someone that needs a lot of development, that you need to basically almost baby them and stuff, but they have been recommended by others, like, hey, they have a lot of potential.
Yeah.
So if they have a lot of potential to bring something to the table, but they're not performing or quote unquote bringing out some fruits, producing fruit, is that something that's loving, or is that something you have to reject and be like, that's not for us?
Yeah. I think, are we talking about the border, or are we just talking about people in general?
People in general.
Okay.
And then we could tie this in somehow to the border.
Yeah. We got 2 minutes left. I would love to talk about this with the border, just because I think there's a lot of research right now relative to, one, there's jobs that are being left unfilled right now that could be filled by individuals that are at the border. Two, there's always, the research is very clear relative to as best you can tell, individuals that are here illegally and the contributions that they're making, that because there's always the common line that said, well, they're taking more of our resources than they're actually giving back, which the research doesn't indicate that whatsoever. But again, like, I'm of the mind, and I've been very clear on this, I'm of the mind that they're still breaking law because they're here illegally, and we need to account for that. But I would just tie it back to the article and to move it away just from the immigration debate is to recognize that, there's value in individuals regardless of however much that they're worth, or however much, or how much their bank account is. And when we fail to see, when we limit ourselves to only avail ourselves to people of means, that we miss out on what the intangibles that people that may not have means can bring to the table. And I hate that. I hate that we're missing out on that, because there's richness that comes not from simply receiving, but from giving, right? Like,
absolutely.
There's a beauty to that. There's a gospel rhythm in that I'd hate for us to miss on this. And so that was David Brooks, his 5 lies our culture tells us. And you can find out more information on that and read that article. There's a link on our website as well at pointofview.net. But we've come to the end of a show, and so I want to say thank you so much for tuning in to the Millennial Roundtable on Wednesdays. It will be moving to Tuesdays here at the beginning of the month, and until then, though, we'll see you next Wednesday.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your health care. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.